February 22nd, 1936. Langley Field, Virginia. Wind cuts across the airstrip like a razor, carrying the metallic tang of cold aluminum and the low rumble of radial engines preparing for tests that could shape the future of American air power. Captain Willard Parsons, Army Air Corps test pilot, pulls his shearling collar tight as he approaches the strange new shape on the tarmac. Boeing's Y-1 B-17, its vast wings almost unnaturally wide, its fuselage long and lean, its nose unarmored and hauntingly exposed. Mechanics move beneath it like ants under a battleship hull, their gloved hands tapping rivets and latches, their voices nearly drowned by the snarl of a Wright R-1820 engine coughing to life. Parsons climbs the ladder and settles into the cockpit, its interiors bare metal and wires, more laboratory than airplane. The tower crackles. Test Flight 3 cleared for takeoff. He pushes the throttles forward. The bomber trembles, then rolls, its four engines finding harmony like a deep mechanical choir. But minutes after liftoff, as the Y-1B-17 levels out at 12,000 feet, Parsons feels the bite of reality, controls sluggish, nose wandering under modest wind shear, and the unsettling vibration that ripples through the frame when he banks too hard. He whispers under his breath, "She's big, but she's soft." Back at Langley, engineers gather around him after the landing. Robert J. Woods from Boeing, trim, bespectacled, with a slide rule sticking from his breast pocket, listens as Parsons describes the aircraft's shortcomings. Underpowered, lightly armed, no defensive turret, vulnerable from the tail, too exposed in the nose. Woods doesn't argue. He simply nods, silence betraying the truth. The Army wants a long-range bomber, but this early design feels more like a fledgling than a fortress. Yet Boeing has no choice but to bet its future on this ungainly prototype. And Woods knows what the generals in Washington don't. Europe is tilting toward another war, and the next conflict will favor the machines that can dominate the sky. The Army's evaluators file reports calling the bomber promising but insufficient. Newspapers, when they mention it, call it the Big Boeing, not yet deserving of anything more heroic. But inside the design rooms in Seattle, Woods studies test data late into the night, lit only by desk lamps and the occasional spark of a metal draft tool. He sketches the first ideas for a rotating turret, a hemispherical dome of aluminum and steel that could transform a passive bomber into something that could bite back. He runs his fingers along the blueprint, imagining twin 12.7mm Browning machine guns, swiveling to meet a diving enemy fighter. He writes in the margin, "Survivability must equal range." Weeks pass. More tests, more feedback, more doubts from the Army. But Woods keeps pushing the evolution forward. Add armor plating near the cockpit floor, reinforce the wing spar, increase the capacity for fuel while maintaining balance on long missions. But above all, guns. The sky of the future will be ruled by those who can survive the storm of fighters, not just outrun them. Each modification inches the bomber toward a new identity, though no one yet dares say the words aloud. The Y-1B-17 goes back into the air, heavier now, its silhouette slowly matching the dangerous shape Boeing imagines but hasn't yet built. Parsons takes it up again in late spring. This time, the frame feels steadier, the engines more responsive. The handling is still rough, but the potential is unmistakable. When he steps out of the cockpit, he finds Woods waiting. "She's closer," Parsons says. Woods only nods. They both know what the aircraft must become, because across the ocean, in skies not yet burning, Germany's Luftwaffe is rising with alarming speed. Engineers at Boeing work like men racing a clock no one can see. Turret prototypes take shape. Thicker skin panels line the fuselage. The Browning guns, originally afterthoughts, begin to multiply. 2, then 4, then 6. Woods pushes for even more, convinced that only overwhelming defensive firepower can guarantee a bomber's survival. Factory workers test the turret mechanisms in roaring cold chambers, simulating the thin air above Europe. Prototypes freeze, motors stall, Woods demands redesigns. Another round, another failure, another attempt, and slowly the pieces begin to align. Something formidable is emerging. Not yet mighty, not yet famous, not yet the B-17 known to history, but the seed is there, a promise forming under rivets and steel, that an American bomber can be more than a target. It can be a fortress. By the end of 1937, test pilots notice it too. Parsons takes another flight and radios down mid-air. She feels different, like she wants to fight. No one in the tower responds at first. They simply listen to the hum of engines overhead, a sound thicker and fiercer than the bomber that first appeared months before. The aircraft circles above Langley as the sun slips low, casting long shadows across the field. Woods stands outside the hangar, hands in his pockets, watching his creation carve wide arcs across the fading sky. He knows the work is far from finished, but the evolution has begun, and there is no turning back. Continue to generate the next section. Include this placeholder at the start, August 14th, 1938. Boeing Field, Seattle, Washington. Rain streaks across the hangar windows in silver sheets as Robert J. Woods stands over the evolving prototype. No longer the tentative Y-1 B-17, but something heavier, meaner, its nose armored, its belly fitted with the company's first operational power turret. Sparks dance from a welder's torch as crews fasten the reinforced frame. The smell of ozone and hot aluminum mixing with the scent of machine oil that saturates every corner of the facility. Outside, a team wheels crates filled with 12.7mm Browning AN/M 2 machine guns across the slick concrete, their boxes marked with stenciled warnings. The gun crews unpack one of the heavy Brownings on a bench, the weapon's long barrel gleaming beneath the lamp. Woods runs his hand along the turret ring, thicker now, redesigned after the freezing chamber failures, and the motor inside hums with a low, confident rhythm. "Try the Traverse," he says. A mechanic flips a switch and the twin guns swing in an arc, smooth as a dancer, the mechanism no longer choking or rattling like the early prototypes. "Good," Woods mutters, though his eyes remain sharp, always searching for the next flaw. By early afternoon, the clouds break just long enough for test pilot Lieutenant Harold S. Farrow to take the aircraft, now labeled the B-17B, into the sky. The engines roar across the field, their combined power vibrating through the hangar walls. Woods and the engineers step outside as the bomber lifts away, noticeably faster with refined Wright Cyclone engines pushing harder against the damp Washington air. Farrow climbs to altitude, and over the radio his voice crackles. "Stabilizers holding, turret functioning. She's responding like a heavier bird, but a steadier one." He banks hard eastward, testing the reinforced wing spars that Woods fought to thicken against Army resistance. Below, Boeing workers tilt their heads upward, watching the silver shape carve through the gaps in the clouds. When Farrow lands an hour later, the grin on his wind-chapped face is all Woods needs. She's not soft anymore, she's sturdy, feels like she can take a punch. But sturdiness would not be enough, not with whispers from Europe growing louder every month. Reports of Luftwaffe Bf-109s tearing apart lightly armed bombers filter through military channels. Woods reads every one. He circles entire paragraphs, tapes photos of shot-down aircraft to the drafting room wall, and calls for more sweeping changes. Armor plates grow thicker. The tail receives twin Brownings. The radio compartment gains another. Engineers begin carving space in the nose for heavier forward guns, even though weight margins shrink dangerously thin. "A bomber that cannot defend itself is a tomb," Woods tells the Army representatives who complain about cost. "And you don't want to send tombs into Germany." By 1940, the B-17C and D models emerge. Not perfect, but undeniably tougher. Crew feedback shapes each iteration. Add protection near the waist gunner's feet. Strengthen the ball turret brace. Improve oxygen reliability above 25,000 feet. Each suggestion carries the urgency of men who know they may one day rely on these very systems to stay alive. Boeing responds with urgency of its own, often redesigning components within days. One evening, Woods finds two engineers asleep at their drafting tables, slide rules still clutched in their hands. He drapes his coat over one of them and keeps working. Then, December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor. News spreads across Boeing Field like wildfire. Workers gather around radios, jaws clenched, eyes narrowing with a grim understanding. The bombers they are building will no longer be theoretical tools of deterrence. They will go to war, and they will go soon. Within weeks, full-scale acceleration begins. Factories expand. Turret contracts increase. The B-17E rolls out with dramatic changes. A redesigned tail carrying a dedicated gunner, a deeper fuselage, stronger armor, and an improved dorsal turret. Test pilots immediately feel the difference. This one fights back, Farrow reports. Woods watches from the runway, exhausted yet electrified, knowing this is what he had been shaping toward since the Y-1 B-17 first trembled off Langley's runway years before. By mid-1942, the first E models arrive in England. They taxi across the cold, misty airfields of East Anglia, their wings glistening with dew, ground crews staring in awe. The British airmen, accustomed to watching their Wellingtons and Stirlings fall prey to German defences, circle the newcomers like museum patrons studying a new exhibit. One RAF sergeant runs his hand along the turret dome and murmurs, "A proper brute, isn't she?" Inside one of the American crews, 22-year-old Lieutenant Jack Wilford tests the new defensive configuration while the engines idle. He pulls the trigger on the waist gun. The chatter of the Browning reverberates through the fuselage like a declaration. His tail gunner, Private Earl Pops Hensley, straps into the redesigned tail housing, marveling at the space and visibility compared to earlier models. "Feels like someone finally thought about keeping us alive," he says. As these first combat-ready fortresses prepare for their baptism in fire, Woods remains stateside, buried in the next set of blueprints. The B-17F, then the future G model with its iconic chin turret, an innovation born directly from the blood-chilling reports that German fighters attack head-on. Every failure, every loss, every bullet hole photographed in combat becomes data the engineers feed into the next evolution. The bomber is growing teeth. It is becoming what history will one day remember. Yet here, in the dim drafting rooms of Seattle, the transformation still feels fragile, held together by stress calculations, sleepless nights, and the stubborn conviction that American aircrews deserve a machine capable of bringing them home. Outside, the rain returns, drumming against the windows as welders light their torches once more. Woods presses his palms against a blueprint of the B-17F, eyes narrowed, voice low. "One more step," he whispers to the empty room. "We're almost there." August 17th, 1943, 25,000 feet above Wilhelmshaven, Germany. Ice forms along the edges of the B-17G's canopy as Lieutenant Jack Wilford peers through frost-streaked glass, scanning the endless grey horizon for flak bursts or the dark silhouettes of Messerschmitt Bf-109s. The fortress rumbles beneath him, engines synchronized, wings flexing under the strain of heavy bombs and reinforced armor. Bomb doors locked. Check. Turrets operational. Check. Wilford's voice crackles through the intercom to his crew. Private Earl Hensley, manning the tail turret, scans the sky nervously. "They're coming! 12 o'clock high!" The whine of German fighters grows louder, mingling with the deafening drone of American engines and the shattering pop of flak below. This is the moment Boeing's engineers had envisioned, a fully armed bomber, designed not to flee but to survive a storm of bullets. Dorsal and ventral turrets swivel with uncanny precision as gunners open fire. Twin 12.7mm Browning guns chatter like machine gun hail across the clouds. Pilots and gunners alike feel a sense of empowerment that earlier crews in Y-1B-17 prototypes could only have dreamed of. Each E, F, and now G model has been tested in wind tunnels, stress chambers, and combat simulations, but nothing can fully prepare men for real fire. A Messerschmitt dives. Hensley tracks it with the tail guns. A puff of smoke trails the enemy as rounds find their mark. Another fighter peels away, its pilot underestimating the newly fortified flying fortress. Wilford maneuvers the plane into a gentle bank, engines roaring as if celebrating the fortress's first victories. Bomb bay doors open with a heavy thud, releasing the payload toward the harbor below. On the ground, explosions blossom in orange fireballs, rippling water and shrapnel across Wilhelmshaven docks. Back inside the bomber, gunners reload in a choreographed rhythm, checks and counters keeping chaos at bay. Radio chatter reports wingmen down, yet the survivability of the B-17's reinforced frame and layered turrets keeps the crew alive, even as debris and flak pierce aluminum here and there. Woods, thousands of miles away in Seattle, reads the after-action report as if absorbing each line personally. 12 enemy aircraft engaged, 5 destroyed, no crew casualties. His heart hammers, not from pride alone, but from the acute awareness that every innovation, every sleepless night, every blueprint alteration has proven its worth in fire and steel. The fortress has claimed its identity, emerging from vulnerability into legend. By late 1944, the B-17G dominates Allied bombing campaigns over Germany. Each raid is a symphony of mechanical precision and human courage. From the high-altitude formations above Berlin to the smoke-choked skies over the Ruhr Valley, the fortresses endure flak, fighters, and freezing conditions that would have destroyed earlier models. Crews come to trust the planes implicitly. Turrets, armor, and redundant systems become extensions of themselves. And as they return to battered airfields in England, engines ticking and crew exhausted, Woods' name circulates quietly in debriefs and letters. Though few know it, the man who helped engineer these leviathans is as responsible for the survival of these young airmen as the pilots themselves. Across decades, photographs of B-17 formations above European cities capture a silver wall of determination. Each plane carries a lineage of innovation, beginning with a fragile prototype and culminating in an aircraft capable of dominating skies and protecting lives. The flying fortress is no longer a hope, it is reality. And in the minds of its engineers and crews alike, it represents the triumph of ingenuity, persistence, and the human will to turn vulnerability into power. With every mission completed, every enemy repelled, the B-17 proves its name true, a fortress in the sky forged in steel, sweat, and courage. May 8, 1945. RAF Bassingbourn, England. The war in Europe has ended, yet the airfield is filled with a quiet reverence as battered B-17 taxis along rain-slicked tarmacs. Lieutenant Jack Wilford steps down from his final mission, his boots sinking into mud, his hands trembling from months at 25,000 feet under constant threat. He glances back at the silver behemoths lined up in neat rows, fortresses whose turrets still glint like eyes watching over the men who trusted them to return alive. For every pilot and gunner who survived, there were stories of those who did not. Yet countless lives were saved by the relentless improvements that began with the Y-1B-17 prototype and the unyielding vision of engineers like Robert J. Woods. Inside the hangar, Woods examines a final batch of blueprints for post-war B-17 adaptations, now confident that the aircraft has earned its place in history. He remembers the first test flights at Langley, the endless nights redesigning turrets, reinforcing spars, and calculating armor placement to balance weight and survivability. The war tested every innovation, it exposed every weakness, and it rewarded every solution born of sweat, intellect, and stubborn determination. Veterans of the air campaign speak of the fortress with a mixture of awe and affection, how it could absorb flak, repel enemy fighters, and return its crew home when other bombers would have fallen. The B-17 became more than steel and rivets. It became a symbol of resilience and American industrial ingenuity. Museums and air shows decades later display restored flying fortresses, their fuselages gleaming under spotlights, as crowds marvel at their size and sophistication. Pilots recount stories of dorsal turret firefights, waist gunner duels, and mid-air formations that stretched for miles, teaching new generations the lessons of courage, teamwork, and trust between man and machine. The legacy of the B-17 is not only measured in tons of bombs dropped or sorties completed, but in the evolution from an underpowered, vulnerable prototype into the renowned flying fortress that dominated skies over Europe. Every design change, every calculated risk, and every sleepless night in Seattle and Langley contributed to an aircraft that could survive what many thought impossible. And as the sun sets over preserved airfields, the shadow of the B-17 reminds the world of a simple truth. Innovation, when coupled with determination and human courage, can transform weakness into enduring strength. The Flying Fortress, forged from vulnerability into legend, stands as a monument to the engineers, pilots, and crews who turned vision into victory.